All right. All right, we're going to be talking about one particular type of painting style and one particular type of poet style, and how they can relate to each other. Do you remember the Latin phrase that I started this all off with? What's it called? That's the translation, exactly right. Pictura poesis. Ut pictura poesis, as is painting, so is poetry. And so I want to talk about these two different styles, one of painting and one of poetry, because one of the things that you're asked to do on this assignment is to, excuse me, look at not only the thematic similarities, like how are the three works thematically linked, but also structurally linked. How does the way the painting look? How does the features of the painting relate to the features of the song and the features of the poem? Okay, so today's exercise is going to show you how to do that. Okay, with respect to the structure. So I want to talk a little bit about Impressionism first. So the painting that you see up on the screen right now is one of the most famous Impressionist paintings in the world. Claude Monet was a French painter in the Impressionist style and is probably the most famous Impressionist in the world. There is a Monet exhibit at the Denver Art Museum right now. Unfortunately, it is gone on Monday next week, and it is entirely sold out. So if you don't have tickets, you can't go. But there are paintings in that collection in Denver that we will probably be talking about. This is not one of them. This is firmly planted in a museum in Paris. Doesn't really travel much because of its importance. So the Impressionist movement was, like a lot of things at this particular time, a radical departure, right? We've seen a lot of the examples of Victorian painting. And what is the central characteristic of Victorian painting? Oh, I thought that was your hand.
Oh, no.
What's the answer?
Isn't it like lines and not the movement, but like there's like fixed lines and like fixed people?
Not quite. Danielle?
Isn't the Renaissance, there's like a point of
We're not talking about Renaissance. Victorian.
Oh.
The period right before the one that we're talking about now. Parker? Real life. Realism. Okay? We go from Romantic period to Realist period, right? Victorian. And of all of the things that you could possibly say about the painting on the board, realistic is not one of them, right? There was a group of painters in the late 1860s, early 1870s, who got together and they were sort of tired of the establishment, the art establishment, and they wanted to try new shit, basically. And so they started painting in this style with really sort of short, broken brush strokes, very few blended colors, just straight up colors right out of the tube kind of thing, that really don't convey forms, but ideas. And there was an art critic, they had their own show. They had an art show. The traditional Paris art show was happening at the time, and they rented a building right across the street and had their own art show because they weren't invited to the Paris art show. So they said, you and we're gonna rent our own building, and they did, and they had a display of paintings like this, in this style. And there was a critic who showed up for the Le Monde, which is the Paris version of the New York Times. And he said, your paintings don't look finished. They look more like an impression.
We're trying to capture a moment in time.
The key is what I just said. They look like an impression. That's where the word impressionism came from, was that guy's critique. He wasn't complimenting them. He was criticizing it, saying your shit isn't finished. It's half done. It's an impression of a sunrise, but it's not actually, because what they were used to was the realism of the Victorian period that had been happening for 50 years, 45 years. And suddenly these guys show up and they're like hacks, according to the art establishment in Paris. So, this painting, Impression Sunrise, is sort of a quintessential example of Impressionist art. And it's considered to be, one critic described it as one of the most poetic expressions ever painted, which is exactly why I chose it. So, one of the things about Impressionism as a movement, as a sort of countercultural movement, is that it seeks to sort of disrupt a tradition, but also it moves away from reality into emotion and feeling. So you could say, because the subject matter is a sunrise, the subject matter is kind of like the Romantic period, right? With a focus on nature. But the idea wasn't necessarily to capture nature so much as to capture how you feel when you look at it, right? He wanted to sort of transcribe his feelings when looking at a scene, rather than simply rendering the details of a scene in the most accurate way possible. Trust me, Claude Monet was plenty capable of painting a very realistic scene if he wanted to, but he didn't. He wanted to paint an idea, a concept, a feeling. So I want you to look at this painting. I'm going to put up a slightly larger view of it. And take a couple of minutes and tell me what you see. What do you see? What is the mood of the painting? What's the tone of the painting? If there's a story to be told, don't raise your hand yet. Not even finished asking the question. You're going to be looking at this for 5 minutes, not 5 seconds. If there's a story to be told, what is the story? So look at it carefully. You can go up to the board, look at it closely if you want. You're welcome to. And then I'm going to call on some people to go up to the board and show me what you see. Okay? So take a few minutes.